Hi, everyone. Welcome to Shift to AI, presented by Cycode, the agentic development security platform. I'm your podcast host, Roland Cloutier, former global chief security officer at TikTok, ADP, and EMC, now Dell EMC, and digital business executive, helping other companies develop their next generation cyber defensive operations. So, this is a show where I sit down with the world's leading CISOs to talk about the shift to AI, what it means for security, how AI driven development is changing our programs, capabilities, and mission space, and what it takes to actually build agentic security. And this is our first episode. And I've been looking forward to recording this for quite some time because today I am joined by two amazing peers and great practitioners. Ramy Houssaini, who is a multiple time CISO and Chief Cyber Solutions Officer at Cloudflare most recently. But also, I've known him for well over a decade as peers in the industry, fighting bad guys together and sharing tips, tricks, and working side by side. And Phani Dasari, Chief Trust and Resiliency Officer. And by the way, we're going to get to that title a little later in this podcast at Firstsource. Multiple time CISO, and a little background from my perspective on Phani. I say I've known him since he was a kid, since he graduated his post grad, worked in a few of my organizations, and it's just great to see so many wonderful practitioners doing great things. So, guys, welcome. I appreciate you joining me on my first kickoff show.
Thank,
Thanks for having us.
thank you, and appreciate the warm introductions for both of us. Thank you.
It's not going to last long, guys. We're going to jump right into it. So, hey, I'm going to Remy. I'm going to start with you, but this question is going to be for both of you. So, Fanny, you're getting a break on this first one. You get to think about it for a second. Guys, walk me through the first 30 minutes of your morning, what you're looking at before you've had your second coffee, and then how about the last 30 minutes of your day? What does that look like to you? So first 30, last 30. Remy, you start.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Roland. A real pleasure to join you. So, those who know me, I know that actually the first coffee is a cappuccino and that there's no second coffee. So, I pride myself on following this discipline. So, for me, the first 30 minutes are really about signal and not noise. And actually, the distinction between the two has become its own discipline. The volume of AI and security commentary is exceeding anything that our industry has seen. And for me it's important like to be very focused on a narrow curated list of primary sources or research practitioners that are basically shipping things, and I prioritize that over a fire hose of, in a way, noise. So I'm scanning in the first 30 minutes what has changed overnight in capability, and not necessarily focusing on the opinions, but more on the actual change in capability. The last 30 is a bit the opposite mode, if you will. I take a step back from the stream to really ask what all of what I learned during the day means in the grand scheme of things. What are some of these important shifts that rarely announce themselves like in a single headline, but show up over a pattern, across a week, a month. So for me, the evening is about a synthesis and really coming up with like the key priorities for the week ahead.
Oh, excellent. Fanny, how about you? First 30, last 30.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the opportunity. The first 30, I built my security philosophy in, Roland Cloutier school. So uh, I put a premium on clients and the business, right? So that's where my focus in the morning is. And it's a global organization. So I wake up, I see if I have any client escalations, number one. Number two, if I see, is there any leadership from is my CEO, my CTO, is there anything from them, right? That's my first thing I do as soon as I start my work. Then I pivot to high context signals. If I have anything that I should worry about, that needs my immediate attention, and then whatever is the outcome of that based on, and I'll move. And if that's not the case, then I'll move to understanding, how are the programs that we are, in flight, how are they doing? Because the global team, half the organization is already midday, or their evening, so there's a lot accomplished. So I want to see, what that is, and then that's how I start my morning.
Yeah, I find it so interesting. Both of you have this concept of understanding your operation. So understanding the context of the globality of the organization you're serving and the jurisdictions you're operating in. Totally got that. But I love this perspective of, does our stuff work, and has something changed that's not making it as an effective? And I think and obviously this is about shifting to AI, so we're going to talk a lot about AI, but I hope we get into this conversation about how does this help us even more around controls assurance and verification and validity of our operating environments. Ramy, I want to set the stage a little bit, because the two reasons, the one of the main reasons I wanted you two on the first show is you both were part of important documents that have been written over the last month or so, in this changing time. And you, Ramy, co-authored the AI Vulnerability Storm, Building a Mythos Ready Security Program, but you did it in the context of being a 2-decade in-seat defender. So from your perspective, how would you describe the moment we're facing right now as practitioners?
Well, I would say that really we're not dealing with a storm anymore. I mean, since that paper was actually released, and by the way, I take this opportunity to really again thank the Cloud Security Alliance for championing that community-wide perspective on the topic, and more specifically, Gadi Evran, who really herded cats over a weekend to
One
release
weekend.
that paper. Yeah,
That
one
was
weekend, which
I,
was
I never done before since I've been doing this. That's so many 20 21 CISOs, Remy, was it?
A lot more, actually. I
Really?
mean, a lot of co-authors, and then obviously an extended ecosystem of reviewers, and that was really a
Yeah.
great moment in our community. So, to answer your question, I mean, I think from a defender standpoint, I mean, this is no longer a storm. This is climate change. So, for decades, our entire profession was really resting on a big assumption that if we have a skilled talent, if we have enough tools and enough caffeine, we could basically think faster than whoever was on the other end trying to attack us. So we sort of hired around this assumption. We organized ourselves around it, and every war room, every tabletop exercise, every escalation path, every quarterly pen test, in a way, was a monument to this idea and to this assumption. And we placed human judgment and human action as the rate limiting step in our attack and defense mindset. And unfortunately, with the Mythos class models, I mean, that assumption has expired. So we are dealing with an environment now where AI is discovering vulnerabilities in bulk. It's basically chaining them. It's allowing attacks that can be highly orchestrated. And the change really is also around the tools that are now available to the attackers. We're talking now about the citizen hacker. You don't really need to be an expert in networks, in application, in cybersecurity to actually launch a very, substantial attack against network. And that's really fundamentally what has changed. So for me, we have a moment where we are going to face some short-term difficulties because obviously there's a mismatch in capabilities at the moment, but we have also a moment of transformation. This is an amazing moment where I'm super optimistic, if you will, about the midterm, long-term perspective of this, because it's going to force us within cybersecurity to transform to turn some of these tools inward and to be able to really ask ourselves honest questions about what matters, about having the right architectures, having the right resilience. So I believe that this is going to really, really be transformative and in a positive way for us. So I feel that this is an exciting moment for our community.
I I couldn't agree with you more. And what's interesting, Ramy, from my point of view, is I think when we get over this, I'll call it a hump over the next 18 to 24 months, where we burn down the legacy issues that we have to deal with and get to a net new reality, or um, temperature, global temperature, if you will, if I use your
Mhm.
metaphor a little bit, that we'll actually be in a really good spot to defend, to see, to understand, to respond, to be resilient, because we can do things that the adversary cannot, because we understand our environment, and we will have the tools and technologies and speed across a more dynamic view than they have. So I'm like you. I get excited when I talk about this. I mean, I it's going to be a painful couple of years. Don't get me wrong. We've got a lot of cleanup to do, a lot of things to implement, a lot of new organizations, and we'll talk to that in a few minutes. But this is really important. And Fani, I didn't see you shaking your head no when Remy was talking. So you're a sitting CISO defending a major multinational infrastructure that implicates access to other like you have a sizable job, protecting a lot of different perspectives. Are you seeing signals that tell you that this isn't just a security hype, and that this is just a magnificent change in our digital capabilities, ecosystems, and businesses?
Absolutely, 100%, right? It's not a pivot; it's a shift, and these are not change of rules of the game. The sport has changed, right? And the way it has changed is, I love acronyms. So the 4S, I look at the 4S formula for this, right? The scope, the speed, the scale, and the sophistication. All four have changed completely. The scope at which things a bad actor says to come at you is completely changed. They can scale in minutes. The speed at which they come at you, is you don't even have days. You sometimes you don't even have hours, right? You have to defend yourself in minutes. And the sophistication, right? The one good thing with sophistication is now everybody has those techniques available. The nation state used to have these things, and then now, to take Ramy's words, the citizen hackers have it now. So do we, right? So the same capabilities are available to us. And the advantage that we have is, what is our moat is the domain knowledge that we bring in, right? And then we understand our infrastructure really well. We understand what is important for us, right? There is, somebody said this wonderfully: you can't patch your way out of this. Is the old playbook is out of the window. You can't do that,
I,
right? So
I,
you have to have a very different way of doing it. I know we will discuss more, but yeah, those are my thoughts on the latest shift.
I actually want to jump into that. I'm gonna you just bring up a really good point with that answer. So, Ramy, I'm going to throw it out from the left field, because here's my belief. My belief is we're going to get to a zero defect capability, meaning when we
100%.
release when we release infrastructure as code, business as code, digital partnerships as code, products as code, everything's going to be code. That
Yeah.
we're going to have the capability to literally come out with zero defect and keep up on the vulnerability and the commitment across the changing external environment, map that to CTI, map that to our general infrastructure, and have some really crazy stuff that we're only starting to begin to scratch the surface on how we
One
can look at.
caveat I would put there, Roland, is if you are not ready to get out of your legacy systems for whatever reason, that is the only caveat. Where if you have to move, if you don't move to the next versions of it, I know some businesses, because certain applications bring you certain revenues, they don't want to get out of it,
Right.
right? And legacy tech, that could be one component, but again, you have other methods of protecting those, like we have been doing now, so we have to continue to do that. But yeah, the rest, everything, you're spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Ramy, what do you think? since this is a massive change, and I love the way that you framed it at the beginning. What do you think are the steps to get us towards this zero defect capability? Like, what do organizations really have to be thinking about over the next couple years, to get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Fanny just highlighted. I mean, he's talking about, cyber and technology depth, and I think this is going to be incredibly relevant. I feel that architecture is going to become the ultimate control. And the reason I mentioned this is we are past patching in a way as the primary measure that you and the primary control for defense. Containment and speed is going to be incredibly important. So if we think about how would we measure and assess success, because once we start thinking about how success is measured, we can work our way backward and figure out, well, what does it mean in terms of investment and portfolio allocation and so on. I would say that we would be focusing on some key metrics like the defender lag, the time to contain against an adversary, time to exploit. So this is like an important metric considering like where we are at the moment. We will be thinking about like the blast radius index, how accessible are our crown jewels. And this is going to be incredibly powerful. Fanny mentioned that we do have indeed like domain expertise. We have that home field advantage, as I call it. So being able to understand the crown jewels, the most critical applications, and figuring out, well, what are the different hops and steps to actually get access to them, and what could go wrong, and be able to qualify and quantify that blast radius index is going to be incredibly important. The other metric that's becoming even more powerful is to what extent our security and technology operations are autonomous. So it's the coverage ratio of the type of workflows, whether they're tactical or actually quite strategic. That how many of these agents we're using in our day-to-day processes, to what extent our detection and response is able to run without the human as the rate limiter, if you will. Self discovery is also going to be incredibly important. Like, how much do we discover on our own versus what we discover from external sources, whether it's an adversary or an advisory. And then the other key metric that is today incredibly important, but it's going to become even more important, I think, in this era, is like the mean time to recover. And that's basically has been like the honest measure of resilience for quite a while. But this is going to be quite important because we need to manage some expectations that now it's all about containment. It's not about eliminating like the probability of an incident. It's really about making sure that we don't have catastrophic losses and that we're able to recover quite quickly and not impact operations. So if we define these as the key success metrics, or the ones that we assess ourselves on, then working backwards, I mean, we need to be thinking about defense in depth. To what extent we have the right containment strategies, and to what extent we're able to really segment our infrastructure and limit like propagation. And that means a whole series of controls that were incredibly important, like 2 3 months, 6 months, 2 years ago, are still going to be incredibly important in the future. Being able to deploy zero trust in a unified way across the entire state, understanding your attack surface and being able to shrink it. So these are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about it. I mean, I would just emphasize the importance of architecture. It's going to be the ultimate control in this era.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm gonna go to a question that I don't think Fani's expecting, but I want to talk about because he's like smack dab in the middle of it. But you mentioned resiliency three times in your last answer, Ramy. So Fani, you've got a new title.
I know. As this,
I mean, like a lot of our peers have gone to chief trust officer, chief security officer, chief information security. Like there's like 15, different titles, and titles don't mean everything. However, sometimes there's a pivot in our industry, and I think we're coming up to one here. And I know you and I have talked about in the past as a converged security expert, running multiple different types of security risk and privacy enforcement programs across multiple disciplines. There's a massive focus now on this concept of resiliency, and what it was 5 years ago,
Mhm.
3 years ago has entirely changed. And so now you're the chief trust and resiliency officer. Um, Talk to me about why your business made that change and what you think that and other like changes are going to mean for us and our peers in our career field.
So I joined as a CISO, right? And this is my new gigs, by the way. So day three, I was having a conversation with my boss, and we were talking about industry trends. And then I was sharing my thoughts around, hey, why I think the CISO role will transform into a trust and resiliency role, because the I in the CISO is around information and data protection, right? The mandate today for a CISO is much, much beyond that. In the agentic era, your companies are not selling products and services, they're selling decisions and outcomes. What was probably a product quality issue at one time is now become the security problem, because the agents, when they make autonomous decisions, and they make decisions at a speed and scale we're never seen in our lives. So when a let's say you're doing claims processing, and let's say your error rate is 3%, and you have 5,000 associates, 5,000 adjudications every day, you're talking at 150 error rate. Now imagine the model has drifted 100% from its baseline. The outcome's going to be 100% wrong. Or if somebody maliciously came in and and skewed the model to one way or the other, then you have a set of people that belong to a particular demography, or race, or whatever the case may be. Now you have a class action suit against you. And we have a playbook. If the data is lost, what we're going to do, and how we're going to build the trust back. We have the playbook. And when data is lost, you're seen as a victim. This changes completely. Now you have done such damage to the individuals, and to the business, and to yourself.
So it's still accountability um, at a quality level, just a different type of quality, and someone needs to chair over that resiliency, those new resiliency capabilities in next
Absolutely.
generation
and
digital
and the,
business.
and the consequences are very different. For this, we don't have a playbook yet. And now you're disrupting your business. You probably lose that business completely,
I
right?
mean, just think about it. 3 years ago, we were worried about massive attacks for coordinated inauthentic behavior. We were worried about misinformation, disinformation through the use of AI spread across different mediums and social media and now we're talking about bias in product that delivers negative impact income to a committed quality product you're delivering to market, from information to drugs. It's mind blowing, where we have to think about that. Resilience is just one of those, but it is the trust of what we're delivering. Great point, Remy. I want to I want to pick up on kind of the last conversation you had, because you talked about doing things at machine speed that we have to adapt to, and we have to have capabilities. But if vulnerability discovery and code is becoming machine speed, if we're doing machine speed remediation, testing, and revalidation, um, just what are some of the assumptions of security programs themselves. And I love your answer because I'm cheating a little bit because you and I had this discussion in London a couple of weeks ago that a lot changes. But for peers that aren't there yet, that are just getting their arms around governance and enabling their business to do some of this work, like what are some of those things that are just they're going to become outdated immediately and they need to be thinking about it?
Governance actually is for me like one of those key considerations. I mean, in an era where everything is moving at like machine speed, I mean, the biggest mistake we could be making is really um, not rethinking budget cycles, not thinking about the cost of actually traditional governance in an environment, because if approval speed is an issue, to select an actual security control to deploy it, it's going to become a challenge because we're dealing really with evolutions in the environment from both like a defender and an attacker perspective that really warrant a rethink of governance. So I would say like governance in itself is a big issue. We have to be thinking about AI powered governance and be clear on the type of decisions that could be completely automated and the ones that will require humans on the loop, not necessarily in the loop but on the loop, to be able to validate the execution. So I think we need to again adopt this approach of containing as opposed to patching. And that's like a philosophical shift. And the analogy that I like to use, it's been one that's been used in the past, but I think it's becoming even more relevant now. I mean, think about it like we're building like a watertight compartment into a submarine, right? Like we assume and we engineer the environment so that exploit could happen, but they would be contained. But we're able to reduce the blast radius. We're able to have fast recovery and not deal with any catastrophic challenges. So this is exactly why we need to be taking a step back and not necessarily getting rid of the existing playbook. I think the fundamentals didn't change that much. They are becoming even more valuable. Defense in depth is a core principle for us as defenders, and we need to understand to what extent defense in depth is actually deployed in our environment, to what extent we have the right segmentation, to what extent we have the right egress filtering, to what extent we have phishing resistant, MFA, to what extent we've been very disciplined and rigorous with our identity and access management, and to what extent we've been really ruthless in shrinking our attack surface. So all of these things actually are part of the playbooks, the core playbooks, and they haven't really as principles changed that much. What has changed is how can we make sure that we adapt these principles to machine speed. And this is where the transformation of key processes, starting with governance, is going to be incredibly important.
Funny, I want to switch a question just a little bit,
Sure.
but in the same context, when we talk about everything as code,
Mhm.
right? The business is code, how we
So,
integrate, into our supply chain is code, and our infrastructure is and everything's code. What, from your perspective, does um, defense mean now? Like, what do we have to change in defense in depth now that everything is code? How does it change priorities within our program?
so I think I'll pick on what Ramy said, right? The defense in depth, that principle never goes away. That wrapper has to be around the agentic security that you do. So you have the faith around the guardrails for AI agents, right? In terms of their execution, irrespective of what the agent does, the guardrails alone are not enough. We are not at that maturity level yet because the frontier models are changing every single day. So, are your guardrails pretty effective? That's a changing answer every single day. So having this defense in depth wrapper on top of this is the way. And then the governance architecture is something that you have to follow 100%, because this is going the governance is going to take the center stage of this, because that's how you're not only defending your systems and your applications, but that's how you're also going to defend your business.
Yeah,
Your
I I take that statement with the knowledge that we have to apply it, Funny, to this concept of um, context, intent, and explainability, right? Like
correct.
right now, it's a 0 1. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's not doing what it's supposed. I mean, there's some stuff in bot defense and some other areas that is context, rich in how we do automated defense. But the reality is, from quality to defense, we have to understand the intent of the agentic, the intent of the original request from the time that it started to the
Exactly.
time that it delivers the outcome, right? This outcome based assurance
I would say
is
outcome based quantification, right?
very good. Yeah, I like
That's
that.
that's where our calculation has to go, because it's not going to be your general CRQ anymore. This has to be an outcome centric quantification for every risk that you look at. Then that's how you will make your decision. That's how your agents will make decisions in terms of controls effectiveness, or you wanted to not control that particular outcome, right? It's clearly dependent on that.
Yeah, I mean the changing workforce and what will be your workforce in 2 years is something we might want to hit at the end. But we've been talking for like the last 3 or 4 questions around this concept, and the answers come back to speed and capabilities and what that really means. But um, Ramy, for the CSA released the report. We all read it 5 times. We know it's coming, and that gave us a great, I don't know, framework's probably the wrong word. It gave us an actionable table to build for to to support the organizations we have and give us an understanding of the implications that we need to really be thinking about. And it was so well done. Um, but that time between existence of a new issue and business disruption is going to shrink from ours. And I'm not, and you talked about this in the attack sense last time, right? This, our time to exploitation now is from exploitation to negative impact event. I'm seeing 4 minutes. I'm literally seeing in some major multinationals that have really good teams, in bad things done in under 4 minutes. So when we're dealing with that, you know, um, but on a larger scale of now this is impacting the business disruption. What's the first organizational change, talking about people, that leaders, our peers, should make to really prepare for that reality? And I'll go to both of you, but Ramy, I want to start with you because you've put a lot of time into thinking about this as well.
Organizational change, I mean, if we're thinking about like the talent, we're going to need more builders within the cybersecurity teams, because obviously, yes, the attack protocols have shifted, and the response protocol have to shift as well. So I think that we are, as communities of cybersecurity defenders, are going to have to deploy also a lot of agents in our environment, but not do that in a blind way. I mean, we have to be thinking about, carefully about the scope of these agents, the identity they operate under, and really having the right level of observability. I agree with Fanny, by the way. I mean, I think it used to be that we were focused a lot on identity management and access management. Now I think we're going to be creating almost like a new acronym, outcome management is going to be really key as an actual program for understanding how agents are behaving in our environment. So builders, that's one key ingredient in the makeup organizationally of a new or a next gen cybersecurity program. The second one, evolution, is really making sure that we are doing our due diligence in terms of explaining like this shift to all layers within the organization, to the different executives, to the different lines of business, to the board, because they need to understand that this is a substantial inflection point, and they now need to understand that the technical debt and the cyber debt that they've been carrying on their books, well, I mean, the interest rate has just increased massively on that debt. And as a result, I mean, there are going to be some interesting transformation opportunities of the different stacks. And if we don't do this road, if you will, show internally and explain that, I mean, I think we will be constrained by a mismatch in expectation and understanding of the problem. So for me, making sure that everyone understands the problem, but also the opportunity behind it, because really this is a transformative moment where we could get a lot better, a lot more agile, a lot more resilient. We could really transform our application, create better user experiences. So really deliver on the promise of digital transformation that we all been talking about. And why this step two is super important, because it's tied to what I mentioned earlier, governance. We need to evolve governance. I mean, decision rights are going to evolve as a result of who needs to really be able to get in the loop for some key decisions. Obviously, we cannot wait for weekly, quarterly meetings to make certain decisions. It's going to be very dynamic, and we're going to need to have some degree of confidence that when we are enabling some autonomous remediation activities, that the threshold for those decisions are well understood and well accepted and are part of our overall risk acceptance as a business.
Yeah, I think there's an amazing view that people have a very, very hard time of taking around um, that their organization is going to be very different, and they have to start with the what can I do, what's my responsibility. Like when you think about what our digital ecosystems has become, and you think about a concentric circle, the old bullseye on how we used to protect data, right? Like however you want to look at it, there in the layers of our business from internal to external. Remember, to your point here is that we have different levels of visibility, accountability, authority that gets smaller and smaller as we go out. And maybe it is our data. Maybe we are having an external processor do something, or maybe, but all the things we can do across all of those effective digital business zones within our ecosystem is not always ours to be able to achieve. And so we have to rethink the services we're delivering back to our business. So speaking of services, Phani, and readiness, um, let's just pretend you're a CISO walking into a new Fortune 500 organization tomorrow. Oh, wait, you are doing that. And let's just say, so Remy talked about three metrics he looks at in this total shift to AI. What are three indicators of readiness that you're looking at when you walk into organization, that's going to help you inform about their level of readiness?
Do they have visibility into their LLMs and their AI pipeline? Shadow AI. Do they have comprehensive view of what's going on? Again, we all know what you can't see, you can't protect. So that's table stakes for me, right?
I have the tattoo, by the way.
Yeah.
Can't go ahead.
So that's number one, and then I'll see if there is any governance structures, with respect to onboarding, agents, or your supply chain partners, is there a view for that? What are you doing with respect to managing this? Because when a new shiny tool is in the hands of every citizen in the organization, they do a lot of things, and some good, some could be not that good, right, for the business. So how are you governing that? Do you even have a governance structure? And if somebody tells me that governance structure is with the CISO, then again, that's not a good governance structure. You have to have the right people on that governance structure. You're a chief AI or data officer, your business, whoever is running that particular agents or own that agents, right? Probably your CTO, probably your CPO, and of course the CISO as well. So you have to have that kind of governing structures, right? And three, I'll see, do they even have the education necessary, not just for the leadership, for the normal associates as
Yeah,
well?
can the teams do it, right? The teams have the, the requisite skill. Is there a vodka? Oh, funny. I've had this discussion over the last couple of weeks with other leaders about, we have to make hiring decisions starting now. Like if you're not AI native, you can't work here, right?
Yeah,
Like people have to redevelop themselves into AI nativeness.
exactly. And then you have to bring that culture, that so the teams have anxiety, just be real about this, right?
Yeah.
Especially the foot soldiers, they're like, okay, what, we will be replaced, everything will be automated, so on and so forth, right? That's not the case. What they have, nobody else will have, is the domain knowledge. They being in house is more valuable for the organization than completely automating with some tool that's not going to do anything, right? If you understand your domain, you're the king. And bringing that knowledge to you, and then probably initially, what I would say is attach yourself to the engineering team, and then borrow a couple of engineers, and then go have some fun, ask them about, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to automate this component, I want to automate that component, right? This workflow, that workflow, and take their help.
Yeah.
You play something, then of course you will get the knowledge. And because you have to tell them what to do, and then as a part of the process, you will also become AI native, and 6 months down the line, you don't even need them.
Yeah, there's a lot to do, and eventually I think I'm going to bring into the series like an HR specialist to talk about these massive changes and how we're thinking about the people issues. I wish we had the time to, but I want to get to an important question with Ramy because you mentioned like three or four things just in that last response, Phani, that is, costs a lot, right? This is not free. This is not, this isn't just replace this for that. This is, I mean, there's cost of what we do. There's the new, cost of the tokens we're going to spend to achieve what the business needs to. I mean, there's a lot going on here. So, Ramy, how do you think? Well, I, I'm gonna let you both answer this, but um, first of all, what security investments becomes the most valuable in a um, let's just call a mythos ready world, and what investments become less important? Give me your quick take on more valuable, less valuable in investments.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, which is really the fundamentals and the basics are actually worth a lot more now, not less. And it might sound counterintuitive, but hear me out. I mean, I talked earlier about architecture and architectural containment, deep network segmentation, egress filtering, phishing resistant MFA, all that good stuff, is going to be incredible from an effectiveness perspective because these are the controls of last resort, right? To be able to buy us time when patching can't keep up. So they're really high leverage spend, not legacy hygiene. So I'm a big believer in ensuring that these probably areas where we've been underspending because there's been a lot of focus maybe on some other type of threats are really key to have the right like layering of controls, to have the right defense in depth. So if I were to think about like where I would focus from an investment perspective in terms of new spend, I think there'll be two areas. Agentic identity governance is really shaping up to be a big pain point, and this is something that we are going to need to address as an ecosystem to find a solution to be able to deal with agentic identities, because they're sort of like in between the human identities and the non-human identities. They're in between. They're a category on their own. And we need to be thinking carefully about how we can get the right observability and the right control over these identities, especially in the context of agents chaining themselves and inheriting a different set of privileges as a result. And the other category is really agentic SecOps. We have to be able to transform our detection and response capabilities to move at machine speed. So those are two areas. I mean, a third area is really around um, agentic runtime and being able to sandbox the agent and really understand whenever we have, back to the conversation about outcome, a deviation from the expected outcome, a way to essentially nuke it out and essentially initiate another action. That's going to be incredibly important in a mission critical context where a lot of damage could be made if there is a drift in behavior. What's becoming though less valuable, and this is how the economics work, right? You're going to create some new investment categories and you need to then shift your investments from other categories. Everything that we built around human paced point in time cadence, so the quarterly pen test report, the reactive patch cycle, this is definitely not going to be relevant in the current era. So um, if we want to address this in an economically viable way, we need to also be thinking about the structural reasons why we created cyber debt in our environment. It could be a question of architecture of applications. It could be the different technology stacks that we have in the environment. It could be engaging in M&A and not consolidating. All of these are incredibly important considerations in an era where we need to take a step back and remove classes of risks by addressing the root causes of the challenge. So there is a lot of tactical, there is a lot of strategic, and there is also a reallocation focus, but the fundamentals are still core to this approach.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ramy. And I can't believe we've already run through time. I've taken so many notes. I could take so many more. I want to end this with a direct to do, a thought for everyone listening to this. So, Fanny, I'm going to start with you, and then Remy, you can close it out. Um, what's the one thing listeners should do in the next 30 days to shift to AI?
I would say have visibility, number one, right? Go understand what AI pipelines do you have, what LLMs, what, APIs, third party, AI agents, what's going on in your environment. Please try to understand that first
Fair
and
enough.
have a mechanism to, figure that out and authenticate that that information is accurate. Yeah.
All right, Remy, what's the one thing everyone should do in the next 30 days?
So back to the home field advantage. You have that home field advantage, that domain knowledge. So in the next 30 days, just run a single experiment. Be thinking about like the most critical system. The one that if it went dark, you would have some explaining to the board. To make. I'm sure you're familiar with those type of scenarios, Roland.
I
So
am.
then turn like an agent inward and basically orient it toward this system and try to map out like all what could go wrong and how attackers could actually get to that outcome, which is a bad outcome for you, that that system is actually going down. I think just doing that level of experimentation will teach the the community a good understanding. Okay, here are some plausible scenarios, right? And what are some of the immediate steps architecturally that could be taken to reduce the likelihood of that scenario materializing?
Yeah. So many great tidbits, guys. This is a wrap on episode one of a series I'm so excited to do. And again, I cannot thank you, Phani, Ramy, for stepping up and doing this first one with me. It sets the tone and tenor for what we're going to be talking about over the next several episodes, and probably has shifted and changed some of the questions for my next guests. I will tell you that my one takeaway from this, um, I think, is going to be that term outcome management. Our jobs are changing to understand, defend, manage, and ensure resilience around outcome management for our business. And I think each of us needs to define what that is, decide what it is, and then go architect and execute in a way that supports the mission space of our business. So again, thank you, everyone. Shift to AI is presented by Cycode, the agentic development security platform. Follow the show wherever you listen so you never miss one of our great guests. Until next time, I'm Roland Cloutier, Global Chief Security Officer and Digital Business Executive. Thanks for listening.